Questions are way more important than answers. This is something underlying this talk. If you have an answer, if you're certain about something, then everything closes down. You don't think any further, you know what you need to know. If you have a question, the question keeps coming back to you, the question changes you, the question works on you, and year after year, you learn more, you develop, you grow. I want to give you 3 questions I found over my time in education, and they start there. They start with me 25 years ago, ready to leave home, ready to head out into the world. And I didn't have a career I particularly wanted to do. I had questions I wanted to answer. The way I'd grown up, I had a lovely upbringing, but the way I'd grown up, and particularly at that point in my life, I had a lot of people around me with a lot of answers. I had a very religious upbringing, and in my church, in my home, people were very sure about a lot of things. They were sure who was saved and who wasn't, and what you had to believe, and all of that. At school, you may be able to tell, I ran with a different kind of people. A lot of punks, and we were anarchists, and we were going to change the world, and we were going to have revolution, and we were certain, they were certain, about the same number of things. Some of them completely opposite. Some of them sadly massively mistaken, like the idea that if you keep doing stupid things like that to your hair, in 20 years' time you won't be completely bald. So I set out into the world to find answers to these kind of ideas. What I wanted more than anything else was to be with somebody very, very different from me. I knew what it meant to be me. I knew what it was like to be me. Were all the answers I had the same for other people? So around the age of 20, I end up working with a man called Keith. And Keith was radically different from me. Keith couldn't move his legs. Keith couldn't speak. Couldn't understand language at all. Top half of his body was a little bit like mine, except a little less podgy, because he could move his arms, but his arms were locked. His arms stayed like that. Couldn't bend them, couldn't move his fingers at all, but he could do that. That was his one motion, the one movement he could make. He could smile, and he could make a noise. Had a couple of teeth. That was about it. That's as much as you need to know about Keith. For me, my job was physically caring for him. The question I'd gone with, the question I wanted to answer was, what's the point in him? What value does he have as a human being? What does it mean to be human? Because whatever it means to be human, whatever answer you've given yourself to that question, has to be true for him. And so I started the attempt to communicate with him. He did this in a voluntary way I learned over several months in 3 different circumstances. The first I learned as I started to feed him. And the first few days of feeding him, I saw feeding him as a really important thing. It was a very intimate thing. I could look into his eyes, and he would track me. He would follow where I was, and I thought, yeah, I'm getting through to him. We're beginning to build up a connection. He wants me to be there. He wants me to be in front of him. He wants me to be near him. He's watching very carefully what I do. And about 3 or 4 days in, I learned why he was watching very carefully where I was and what I did. It's because at one point where I perfectly crossed exactly where he wanted me to go, he did that. Incredibly fast, like a disabled ninja. It was incredible speed. He hit the bowl I was feeding him with. It went all over me. It smashed to the floor. Everything went everywhere, and I was covered head to foot in his soup. And he thought that was hysterical. It was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. It's the first time I properly knew he could smile. Another time he did that was the moment you needed to get him out of the door, when you'd packed him into his wheelchair and you were going through the doorways. As you got to the doorway, straight away like that, you pull back a little bit, down comes his arms, move forward. So it turns out the only way you get him through a doorway is a kind of weird bear hug, holding him down and dragging backwards. I won't belabor the point on the third one, but if I tell you that he would do it, and he only got me once, but he would do it as you were changing his diaper, that was a genuinely vile experience. But at the end of it, I've got the start of an answer. I've got the start of something meaningful, because I've got an idea that the value of a human being is nothing to do with what they can say, what they can join, what they can confess, who they can pray to, anything like that. It's just that they're alive. that there's somebody sitting in front of you, that there's somebody meaningful that you can have an engagement with. That's all that matters. And it doesn't matter what your perspective is. It doesn't matter if you've got completely the opposite point of view, like many of my friends at school. This guy can't vote, he can't join their revolution, he can't do any of that. But he is alive. He demands nothing more that you sit in front of him and engage. And even therefore, radically different points of view, like I had in my life up until that point, can be combined, can be united. And what is it that stops us doing that? What I think stops us doing that is institutions. Institutions are vital and necessary. There's mine that I ran for 10 years or so, and I was going to be different. I wasn't going to get caught by any of those things. My institution, my school was going to be incredible. It was going to be perfect. It was going to be everything that a school should be. And I genuinely believed that. I am that arrogant. It is actually true. And this is the girl that began to convince me I was wrong. You may be able to tell from her stunning good looks that she gets from me that that's my daughter. For 7 years, she went all the way through my primary school. And when she'd finished, I sent her on to the local secondary school because that was the system, because that was the right way to do things, because I was a big noise in that secondary school. I went and ran meetings there. I was in charge of the local group of schools. It mattered that people could see the local primary head teacher sending his child on. And the odd times that she came to me and said it wasn't quite working for her, I'd say, don't you worry, love. I'll get up there. I'll sort them out. I'll have a word. They'll listen to me. And so she knuckled down, and she focused, and she kept the difficult times inside, and she didn't share anymore that she was being bullied, that she was being pushed downstairs, that she was having a horrible time. And she didn't make a fuss, and she didn't fight back, because that would have looked bad on me. And by the time she was this equally gorgeous teenager, she was anorexic and using a razor blade to self-harm. And I hadn't noticed, and I hadn't seen it, because you fit into your institution. You knuckle down. The institution isn't there for the outliers, for the people on the edge, for the people who are broken, for the people with special needs, for the people with disabilities, the people who find it harder. You've got 24 kids in your class, that 25th one who can't read properly, who needs you to put a bit more effort in, who needs you to listen a bit more. That's just a bit too complicated. That's just a bit too much. But we have to be the people who redeem our institutions. Our institutions will only make a sacrifice for the people who need us if we make them do so. That sacrifice will be finance, will be time, will be energy, will be your comrades, your colleagues annoyed with you because you've asked them to go that little bit extra to do that little bit more. But those people on the edge, those people who make the wrong decisions, those people who make the wrong choices, that's not my cat, I don't think anymore that's anybody's cat, to be honest, but those people on the edge are what our institutions have to change and adapt and develop to deal with. And they are the people then who can teach us something. If I'm working with special needs or doing training in special needs, I start with something like this. And it's designed in a particular way for a particular reason. Because all of that around the outside, that's true for all of us. All of us have to do that. Some people have problems, have difficulties, and you can see them hanging off there then with what those difficulties might be. But we all share something. We can all learn. And to give you an example from education, from communication, for instance, I'll tell you a little bit about a child, must be 6 or 7 now. He was 4 when I first taught him in that school I just showed you. A kid called Callum. He has autistic spectrum disorder, pragmatic language impairment. That means he finds language difficult, particularly language once it's not concrete, once you're talking about metaphor and more abstract versions of language. And if you're teaching him, and he's finding what you're teaching difficult, he will ultimately do a couple of things. The first thing he will do is he will jump up from his seat, knock his chair back, throw down his crayon or his pencil or his piece of Lego, and he'll shout 2 things. The first, I don't know, I've not watched it out here, I don't know if you get The Apprentice out here, but the first thing he'll do is he'll point at his learning support assistant, screw up his face, and shout, "You're fired." Little 4-year-old, "You're fired." And the second thing he'll shout, he'll point at the work, and he'll say, "It's too heavy. It's too heavy." And you think about that for a second, that's fantastic. I've used that in teaching with older kids a lot. Because you say to the older kids, this is what Callum says. "Ah, that's fantastic." They say, "That's hysterical." They know Callum, they think that's absolutely brilliant. You say, why is it hysterical? Well, it's wrong. Okay, it's wrong. Do you know what he means, though? Well, yes, you all know what he means, don't you? He means it's like he's had to pick something up, and at first he could just about manage it, and he could just about carry it, and it was okay, but increasingly it's getting heavy, and it's stressing him, and it's difficult, and it's unpleasant, and finally he drops it. By the time he drops it, his arms hurt, and his legs hurt, and everything's unpleasant, and he's angry. It's too heavy. You say to the kids, you get that? Yeah, absolutely, we get that. So what's wrong? Well, it's not what we say. We say it's too difficult, or it's too hard. It's like something you've got to break through. It's a different kind of metaphor. So you say to them, well, what that means is he's taken a piece of language that you understand, and he's used it in a new way. And by using it in a new way, he's put a picture in your mind. He's put an idea in your head that makes you see the world differently. Well, that's poetry. That's something incredible. That's something beautiful. And the kids stop for a second. Yeah, absolutely. Callum's brilliant at poetry. Callum's amazing at this. He's made me see the world differently. And that's true for all of those people on the outside. The more different somebody's experience to you, the more different they are from everybody else in that classroom. The more broken, the more difficult they find life, the more they need you to change, and the more they need you to sacrifice. But also the more you'll learn. The more you'll learn about what it means to be human, the more you'll learn about what it means to be you. The more you'll see something remarkable. You have to look at the world differently if you really, truly want to see something that's remarkable. If nobody talks about it, if nobody shows you it, if you don't look, you won't see it. And so that took me back round to where I started, with Keith. That from Keith, somebody massively, radically different from me, and the reason he came into my mind the moment I was asked to do this, even though I haven't seen that guy for 27 years, I learned something that stayed with me all of my life, that every moment you can have a connection with somebody around you. Every moment you can share. Every moment you see the world a bit differently. Every moment you see the world with a little bit of magic. Those moments are precious. That's everything that life is about. That's everything that makes life worthwhile. Thank you very much.